Hello everyone, and welcome to this latest update, this one on Portfolio 1 for SW4014 on the job learning. So what I'll try to do today is provide full guidance on the portfolio submission, initially on these dates, but there are some kind of recent changes that I have to talk about a little bit, but perhaps also to share some learning from the formative submissions to date, the work that you've already submitted for some feedback. So some recent information, well, one just about these sessions. I've decided to have open house sessions. Anyone can join in, including mentors and apprentices, and I will send the details out to everybody. You can see Wednesday and Thursday of this week, Tuesday of next week, and I may well add another one if we need it early in February. Of course, because there has been changes, you may have seen messages already about this, about extensions. There is an automatic extension. I've noticed, in fact, that's the incorrect date. It should be the 26th of April. But in any event, it certainly, that period is where your submission for this particular module comes in. You can get an automatic 10-day extension, but you actually have to apply an OSIS for that. The difference here is that you do not have to add any evidence, which you might normally do in mitigating circumstances. There's a link here as to full details. You might want to kind of familiarize yourself with those details about recent changes. So the formative assignments, I've had a lot of those. Most people are submitting a formative assignment, quite often 4 or 5 or 6 of them. I learned a few things along the way myself, and I'll try to update you on some of those things. When you write these assignments, you think it looks kind of fairly straightforward, but then it turns out that there are things that you haven't considered. By you, I mean me. So we'll talk about the individual elements of the assignment and the portfolio as we go. You can continue to upload work for feedback up at the 28th, which is next Thursday, or Thursday week rather. And it may be that I have to extend that, particularly for people who want to submit their assignment later on. But in general, you can always contact me if you have questions, email, phone me. You can do face-to-face if you like. Whatever suits you. I am open for business as far as questions and clarifications are concerned. So the assignment instructions, let's have a little look at the individual elements of the portfolio. But first of all, a couple of general comments. So there is a portfolio template that I have sent out. It does include a confidentiality statement at the start. A lot of people have asked about that. So really you have to sign that, but more importantly, make sure that your portfolio complies with that. Make sure that there are no identifiable people with lived experience or any details that might lead to their identification. I think one of the things you might consider in that is initials. Not so bad, but perhaps you're better off using a pseudonym. Create a new name for the person and make that clear. With the template, cut and paste your existing work into the template and submit just one document, please, because otherwise there would be 60 by 8, 6 8 4 8. That'd be 480 pieces of work. It's a little bit too much. So if you could just put it into one document, it does make my life easier, to be honest. So I'd ask you to do that if you can, please. There is an index of evidence. It seems clear to me from questions that I've had and comments that not everybody's been keeping an index of evidence, but a lot of people have. The idea here really is that it's an index of actual evidence that exists in the workplace. There are a number of reasons for keeping this and a number of reasons why it's set out like that, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. I think the important thing for your submission is that you should ensure that your mentor sees and agrees and signs the index before your actual submission. So here are the elements. There's 8 in total, and I'm going to go through each one. You'll notice that 2 of them are slightly different. So I will kind of leave those to the end because perhaps they need a little bit more time. There's a general principle that the work that is yours alone is graded. Work that is collaborative is either marked as complete or incomplete. We do assess the portfolios holistically. In other words, we look at some total of the evidence available. That I suppose you could argue really that your journey into social work is marked complete or incomplete, but it has been marked elsewhere. So that's how I can kind of shoehorn it into this definition. So I'm going to take these three, these two, a little bit about the index of evidence, and then I'm going to come back to the agency description and the critical reflection on learning. So 1 to 3, confidentiality statement I've already spoken about. Your journey into social work, you've done that already. You've received feedback. Everybody passed that module. You can refine that work if you like, but really it's submitted and then it would be seen as either complete or incomplete. The mentoring and supervision agreements generally were very good. There was good evidence of collaborative working relationships between you and your mentors, good identification of what you know and can do already, leading to reasonable plans for learning needs and how they might be met. Not everything has to be done immediately. It's just that you might have extend these over a slightly longer period of time on occasion, but we will be reviewing your learning needs and opportunities and plans in the coming months. So we'll have an opportunity to kind of look at those again for the remaining part of the year. If you're not getting the support you need, what do you need to do about this? Well, in the first instance, you might actually talk to your mentor. Now, details about the mentor role have been shared with employers as far back as August last year, and there's been a number of presentations sent out. But it may well be that you were allocated a mentor at a late stage. The mentor might not be entirely clear about what the roles and responsibilities are. I don't think that's generally the case, but you could see that might happen. I suppose the first thing that you might do in that instance is talk to the mentor and explain to them that you should be meeting on a at least fairly regular basis. Mostly people are meeting with their mentor quite frequently. If that isn't working, you might talk to your SRA about that. In the last instance, you might come to me. I think it's quite important. Employers have made a very clear commitment about providing mentors to support apprentices throughout their program. And if that's not happening, then something needs to change, essentially. But I'm guessing a lot of the time that you may be able to just talk to the mentor about that and kind of perhaps clarify the expectations. But if that doesn't work, maybe SRA, maybe me as the module leader might get involved. So the portfolio elements 5 and 6. Direct observation of competent practice. So the competent is there for a particular reason, because certainly with undergraduate students, sometimes they need a couple of goes at this to show competent practice, but I haven't seen that at all in the work that you have submitted. We see a lot of very competent practice, and sometimes exceeding what's required at this stage of your module. Remember, again, we're at readiness for direct practice level, which we will return to a little bit at the very end of the presentation. But essentially, you know, you have lots of experience in working with people, forming and maintaining relationships, and you know your area of practice very well. So competence throughout, that's what I was seeing. Mostly these were done by the SRAs, but not always. It wasn't always possible to make those arrangements, and that's okay too, but it may have some implications for the next observation. It was clearly that most were done with people with lived experience, but again, that wasn't always possible for a whole range of reasons, sometimes because of people's role, responsibilities of the organization, and sometimes because their service wasn't actually open at the moment. So there will be another opportunity, because what people have done a lot of the time is asked somebody to observe them in a slightly different professional setting, perhaps, you know, chairing a panel or something of that nature, and that is absolutely fine. It just means that on the next occasion, there should be a PLE observation, but you have plenty of time to think about that. I note that the date for the next observation is mid-March, and we might have to move on that a little bit more, but I'm talking to colleagues and to see what's realistic or what will work for people in that regard. I'd be interested too, of course, to hear your feedback about that. We will perhaps ask you a little bit about that after this submission. Let's get this one out of the way first. So the feedback from PLE, it was mostly from the observations, but not always. It's often the case that the PLE either isn't able or doesn't want to give feedback, and that's fine. That's their choice. Of course, sometimes the PLE was not the subject of the observations. In those instances, I encourage you to ask for feedback from any professionals involved or other people involved in whatever was observed. So what happens if there's it just isn't possible to get feedback? Well, then I would ask that you design a form that you will use on the next occasion. Hopefully things will have settled down a bit, perhaps. I'm not really sure what quite the right term for that is. But we will be working with Kingston University's PLE group next year and give a bit more time and effort into thinking about, well, what's the best way to do that? What kind of ethical dilemmas might be involved, and so on and so forth. If you absolutely can't get feedback, professional feedback then is the next backstop, if you will. In general, we would encourage you to get feedback as much as possible on your work and to kind of get into the habit of doing that. Again, with a lot of these things, as in my next slide, what happens if there's no observation or feedback? Well, if we've run out of those options, if we can't do a PLE piece of work and then we can't for some reason do a piece of work in professional practice, it's not possible to do these things, well then I think talk to me is probably the best way to go. So there may be many reasons or situations where that might occur, and it's impossible in a presentation like this to go through all the possibilities, but it's pretty easy. Say, email Dermot, give him a shout, let's see what we can work out. So the index of evidence is definitely something that you should be doing on an ongoing basis. If you collect the evidence as you go and index it, it will save the lastminute.com pain and agony of trying to put a load of evidence together at the end of the academic year. So try to avoid that if possible. Your mentor should check this. In some occasions, mentors are checking it on a very regular basis. But at the minimum, we want to see that done 2-3 times, at least 3 times a year, I think is probably best. And signed by a mentor to say that it actually exists. Now, why is this in place? Well, there's 3 broad sets of reasons. One is that you have your actual evidence in the workplace. And your evidence will be things like case records, assessments, reports, things of that nature. Now, clearly in all of that work, people with experience are identifiable, and obviously we can't do that. So we need to preserve the confidentiality of people with lived experience. After that, there are GDPR requirements, which would mean that if you breach that confidentiality in the most general sense, you would probably get into a lot of trouble for that. The information breaches of that nature are punishable by large fines for your organization. So there are, quite significant implications for breaches of that nature, which I'm sure you're fully aware of, but they apply in this circumstance too. The third thing is that regulators occasionally dip sample some of the evidence that people on pre-qualifying courses are collecting to ensure that it does actually exist. So that's also, it's not going to happen very often, but I hope it doesn't happen to you. So when you're collecting that evidence, you index it so that you can show elsewhere that it actually does exist. So the index will be something, let's just say it's a case record. You will have one line in your index of evidence that says case record, and there might be an identifier of where that piece of work might be and where it could be found. The mentor would then see that as part of the longer list and would sign off to say, yeah, this actually really exists in the real world. So that's really essentially what that's about. You can be judicious in the evidence that you choose. You wouldn't put every single activity you ever do in work in there, but you will put in things that are substantively indicative of your practice. That's really the idea. So you probably don't want pages and pages and pages of it, even though as you build this up over time, it will start to get quite a lengthy document. But be judicious in your choice. I could add, well, I could have kind of organized this presentation a little bit better, and therefore would not have had that sentence there. But just remember that there are 3 or 4 points about evidence. Gather it as you go. The mentor needs to sign that off to assure external examiners and other people of that nature that it does actually exist. And the rationale is about just a basic social work principle about preserving confidentiality for people with lived experience, GDPR requirements, which have significant implications for agencies if GDPR or information requirements are breached, and lastly, the regulator has a role to play in all of this. So evidence for the degree program is progressive and holistic. So as you build up your portfolios, it may be that we look in different places at different times for different evidence to actually demonstrate your overall or holistic capability. Hope that makes some sort of sense. So now we go back to some of the mark pieces, and the first of these is agency description. So you know that it is 500 words, and it's probably going to relate to law, policy, and ethics for practice. And we're asking for description rather than analysis. I have read a lot of these. They're generally well constructed. You know your area of practice, your team, your locality of where that happens. You know about the key legislation, perhaps to a lesser extent about some of the policy kind of documents and guidance that are out there. And quite a few people have tried some, you don't go through the list of questions as a kind of must tick off each one of these. But one of the ones that comes to mind and starts to bring a little bit of critical analysis into it is when people suggest changes in practice. And so generally we're seeing pretty comprehensive, straightforward agency descriptions, which seem to me to work quite well. How might you improve this piece of work? Referencing, I mean, I suppose you'll get used to that broken record from course staff in general. We want you to demonstrate your reading and using appropriate references, especially when they're well linked to your point. Gives your discussion credibility and strengthens your argument or discussion. Really, for all assignments, don't go over the word count. The policy means that if we get to, like, say, 500 words, anything after that, we're not allowed to mark. And of course, that would mean your conclusion in the main. So that's a bit unfortunate in a sort of a way. So just try to make sure that you stick to the word count. One of the things that people often talk about is, how do I reduce this Dermot? Well, there are many ways to do that. And we might actually see if we can do a little bit of work in the coming year about what kind of strategies you might employ to do that, or indeed you might attend some of those academic writing classes that are widely available at the moment. Books and peer-reviewed articles, when I mean references, that's really what I mean, and we prefer those over website, even if they are Sky or Basel or something of that nature. Why? Well, we could have a little chat about that if this was a live presentation, and I intend to do that. But really, books and peer-reviewed articles are generally more robust and credible. There are a number of reasons for that. And when we have our open house, if people will be interested in doing that, we can have a little bit of a longer discussion. So reflection, it's kind of like, wow, okay, so we're now starting to kind of reflect, think about, kind of analyze our work. And I can see certainly, you don't have to do this, right? But I can certainly see some people have structured their essay around a reflective model, very typically COB, but one or two others are used. So please go ahead, it's quite a nice thing to do. But by no means think that's definitely what you should have to do. It's just a suggestion. It's something that works quite well for some people, but might not suit everybody's way of writing. So it's critical reflection. All of this is unnecessary, essentially. Sorry about that. But here we go. CRLs are in the first person, so it's your work, your reflections, really. That's the important thing here. What I've noticed is that there is a bit about PCF. Sometimes people don't put in the PCF, and it is part of the essay criteria, so you do need to do that. But you can do it in two ways. Quite simply, you can just add the relevant PCF in the brackets after the point at which it fits in your essay, or some people create a little column on the right-hand side and do the PCF there. Now, I don't mean that you have to, for every reflection, make sure you have PCFs 1 to 9, because it's very unlikely. It's not impossible, but unlikely that every observation is going to lead to all 9 PCFs. I suppose you couldn't possibly do it, but it'd be somewhat artificial, I feel. So that's a small little change that people can make. It ticks the essay criteria. So if I have fed back to you to do that, please make sure that you do that. We'll move on to new set of standards and the IAT apprenticeship standards next year, but for the moment, it's just a PCF, readiness for direct practice level. Each CRL should have a different focus of evidence, a different person or family with lived experience of social work, and of course we've now had to change that. I should really add a different professional interaction of some description. And we want new things all the time, so quite simply you can just reflect on new elements of practice. There are questions that we suggest. There they are. I'm sure you're kind of used to these. It's not really a list of questions that you should go, oh, I'll have to go all through these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're just suggestions of things that you would consider in your assignment. Some of them will be relevant to you and perhaps some not at all. They're timed to be due after the direct observations, which means that you can actually focus on the direct observation, but you don't have to. Several people have made a choice to talk about the direct observations. That's absolutely fine. But you can reflect really on your learning overall since the start of the course in any way that you see fit. It is, after all, your reflection, and your thoughts and your learning. So it's also your choice about which way you decide to go. So just a little bit about the criteria again. This might be over-egging it a little bit, but just to kind of make clear. So it's evaluation of learning development. It should be reflective. So that'll be involved you kind of thinking about what you've learned, why is it important to you, and things of that nature. So that's the critically examined bit. What did you learn? What will you do differently, perhaps in the future? There needs to be some element of recognition of feedback from others, and that can be from a wide range of sources. Typically, we have people with lived experience, the SRAs, the mentors, line managers. But it may be there is an additional professional that you've been working with in some context. I can think of at least one person who's mentioned a family therapist in their team. So wherever that feedback comes from, that's fine. Even better, demonstrate that you acted on that feedback or you used it in some sort of way that promoted your learning and development. Work is appropriate for the academic level. So this is where the references come in and citations, which are consistent with the conventions used at KU, and that means the Harvard referencing system. People are actually providing a lot of good references. It's very clear people are getting more used to doing referencing. It's a bit of a technical exercise, but I'm kind of seeing a lot of good practice and people are getting better at this as they go. And yeah, that's fine. That's good. Keep on. I've also seen quite a lot of good references. So what I've done actually is taken your references and where they are available on ICAT or in the university's learning resources, I've put them on the reading list for this module. So in a sense, you're collectively getting an echo of what you are all reading at the moment and what you found useful. Some really nice references in there, and certainly some things that I have not come across before. So apart from the referencing, think about the structure of your assignment, proofread carefully for typos and grammatical errors, and fix those where you can. This is again about the PCF. I've kind of mentioned that earlier, but again, you need to have some references to the PCF and the different domains of the PCF in brackets or perhaps in a little column throughout your essay. Hesitate to put a number on it, but there's likely to be 5 or 6, I would have thought, something of that nature. So again, it is your reflection in the sense you're looking back, you're moving forward, and it's that moment in time where you're just kind of trying to capture what's going on for you right now. Again, remember is that the PCF level, readiness for direct practice, this is actually what it says about critical reflection and analysis, kind of understanding the importance of analysis, professional judgment, reasoning, discernment. You can read all the rest of it here, but I mean, as we go, this definition, as we up the levels, gets progressively more complex, but really for the purposes of this assignment, we're thinking about these criteria so that you understand. You don't have to go into any great description or analysis of it, but you understand the role of reflective practice and demonstrate basic skills of reflection. I'm seeing that in the assignments over and over again. You understand the need to construct and apply hypotheses in social work practice. So you kind of, something happened in the observation and you're kind of going, oh, and then you talk to the SRA or perhaps somebody else and you go, well, what was happening there? And then you kind of say, well, it may have been this, it may have been that. I wasn't expecting that. So you construct a hypothesis of some description about why it went the way it went. And then you kind of look at that evidence, you can recognize and describe it, and you say, oh, well, this links maybe to this theory or this idea or this practice model, and you kind of assimilate that experience in a new way. You think about it critically, and then perhaps you change your practice for the future. So you can see, though, that these words understand, and recognize are at kind of a level that is not going to be difficult for any of you to achieve at this level. And certainly my experience from reading your work is that you are getting this and you are actually doing it in practice. I think that's quite enough for now. So really, if I just kind of do a very brief summary. So we sent out the template. Use the template to submit all your documents in one go. There's 8 elements of it. The one that might be a bit new to some people is going to be the index of evidence, even though really the mentor should have been asking you for that from the start, but whatever. If you haven't been doing it then, do it now and try to get into the habit of keeping that going. The evidence should be recorded briefly, and it relates to work that stays in the workplace and doesn't come into any of our portfolios or any submissions into the university. You might talk about that evidence and talk about your interactions, but no reports, case notes, etc. And there are 3 reasons for that, which I outlined, which are about maintaining confidentiality and safety, about GDPR requirements, to a far lesser extent, but nonetheless in a real way, the regulator may check that evidence. Then we had several other elements. I've seen really good practice as far as the learning needs and so on are concerned. That was good work, good plans. Sometimes, you know, not everything is going to happen by the 2nd of April, and think about some of your learning needs over a longer time. I liked reading in particular the way people renewed sometimes or started the working relationship with their mentors. Some really good practice there. The direct observations were good. A lot of good practice identified. It's not always been possible to do those with people with lived experience, so you might do it in a professional context of some description now, and the next observation will be with a person with lived experience. Feedback in a similar way. It's not always possible to get that from the PLE that you're working with, and if so, you might get it from another PLE that you're working with, and that will tick that box. In those professional contexts, it's absolutely fine perhaps to, I don't know, if you were in a panel meeting, get a some other professional who was there who could maybe comment in your practice. And if none of that is working, then perhaps you can either talk to me and we can try to work a way around those kind of things and see how we can progress in perhaps a different way. For your agency descriptions, they're generally pretty good, and you might have to tidy it up, follow the feedback, any comments I have made about that, and see if you can kind of make some changes to it. But generally the changes are not huge. I mean, generally people get this, they know what to do, and they produce the required work. The critical reflections are slightly more complex, isn't it? Because, you know, they're about your learning. So therefore, they're actually quite personal in some respects. They can be about the direct observations, but they don't have to be. They can be about your learning in general, and in a sort of way, it is our kind of first step getting towards more critically reflective work, and you will be building that not just in this module, but in general across your course as we go. And I think that is pretty much it. You'll see that there are slightly new arrangements for submissions, quite technical. I'm not going to go through that in detail, but follow the link, read the guidance. And if you are stuck, more than happy to talk about it and come back to me and let's see where we end up. So I think that is quite enough for now, and I look forward to seeing you all again. Take care. Bye.